She owned nothing, yet she owned my entire heart. Listen before you scroll away, because some stories are not written with ink. They are carved into the chest with patience and pain. She had no house that the world would envy, no jewelry that caught the jealous eye of sunlight, no titles stitched to her name. Yet when she walked into my life, everything suddenly had meaning. Her hands were empty of gold, but heavy with sacrifice. They trembled not from weakness, but from years of holding everyone else together, while forgetting themselves. She learned early that the world only bows to those who shine. So she chose to glow quietly. She became a shelter, not a storm. A prayer whispered, not a scream heard. She fed dreams while starving her own, smiled through nights that never slept, and stitched hope into torn days. With nothing but faith and tired breath, people passed her like a shadow on the wall, never asking what stories lived behind her eyes. But I saw them. Entire lifetimes folded into a single glance. Entire oceans of love held back by dignity. She never said, "Look what I gave." She only said, "Are you warm enough?" Never asked for thanks. Only asked if I had eaten. She owned nothing the world could measure. Yet somehow, impossibly, she owned every beat of my heart. Because love like hers does not ask for space. It becomes the home. She owned nothing, yet she taught me the weight of everything. Not with lectures, not with loud wisdom, but with a quiet way she endured storms, as if pain were just another guest. She had learned to serve tea. Her life was a long corridor of compromises, doors she never opened, dreams she folded neatly, and placed on shelves marked later, a later that never came. She wore the same patience every day, like a faded shawl stitched with prayers. The world never noticed its warmth, only its worn edges. But I knew that shawl had saved lives. She understood hunger in all its forms. Empty plates, empty promises, empty days that still demanded strength. And still she gave. Still she shared. Still, she found a way to make little feel like enough. Her voice carried no authority, yet it carried truth. It never commanded the room, but it calmed chaos. When she spoke my name, it sounded like safety. She was never the hero in anyone's story, never the headline, never the celebration. She lived between the lines, doing the work that applause forgets. Time carved lines into her face, each one a sentence she never finished aloud. Wrinkles of worry, creases of waiting, soft marks of love spent freely. She owned nothing the world would insure, nothing that could be stolen or taxed. Yet she owned my courage, because when I felt weak, I remembered how she survived, without ever calling herself strong. She owned nothing, yet she understood possession better than kings. Not the kind written on papers, not the kind locked behind iron doors, but the kind that lives quietly, inside the chest, and refuses to leave. Her days began before the sun learned courage, hands moving while the world still slept, heart already tired, yet never refusing duty. She never asked life for fairness. She only asked herself to continue. The world passed her by like a fast train, faces pressed to windows, dreams speeding ahead. She stood still, waving at futures that were never hers, smiling so no one would feel guilty for leaving her behind. She learned the language of sacrifice fluently. Every sentence began with "I can manage." Every paragraph ended with "It's okay." She mastered the art of hiding pain inside ordinary days so well, even pain began to believe her. Her hands were maps of labor. Each line a road she walked alone. They fed mouths before they fed hope. They wiped tears before resting. They trembled at night, when no one was watching. She never spoke of her own needs, Desire felt selfish to her. Dreams felt expensive. So she invested in others. Spent herself slowly. Like a candle that believes. Darkness matters more than wax. When I failed, she never scolded the fall. She blamed the ground. When I doubted myself, she lent me belief. Without asking for interest. Her love never questioned my worth. Even when I did. She owned nothing that glittered. Nothing that impressed strangers. Yet she owned my resilience. Because every time life tries to break me, I remember her, standing quietly in the storm, proving that survival does not need permission. She owned nothing, yet she carried dignity like a crown. No one could steal. Not polished, not announced, just worn quietly. The way mountains were silence, and oceans were depth. Her life was a long conversation with endurance. Every morning asked, "Can you go on?" Every evening answered, "I did." No applause followed her days. No witnesses stayed long enough to understand how much strength it takes to remain gentle. She stood at the edge of her own exhaustion and chose love anyway. Chose patience when anger would have been easier. Chose forgiveness when bitterness felt justified. The world never rewarded her for this. But she did not bargain with kindness. She knew hunger, not just of the body, but of recognition. To be seen, to be thanked, to be asked, "Are you tired?" Yet she fed others first, as if her own emptiness was a small price for someone else's fullness. Her laughter came late in life, thin but sincere, like sunlight slipping through cracks. When she smiled, it carried the weight of survived years, proof that joy does not need abundance, only permission to exist. She never chased happiness. She waited for it, patient as soil, believing something good would eventually grow from all the tears she buried. When storms came, she did not curse the sky. She tightened her grip on faith, held her family closer, and whispered courage into herself, until fear learned to listen. She owned nothing written in names or numbers. Yet she owned my calm, because when the world grows loud, I remember her silence, steady, unbreakable, teaching me that peace is not found. It is built. She owned nothing, yet she mastered the art of making less feel like enough. Her hands were always empty, but somehow they kept giving. Warmth, reassurance, a quiet belief that tomorrow could still be kind. She learned early that life does not soften just because you are gentle. So she became strong without becoming hard. She bent like a tree in storms, never snapping, never pretending the wind didn't hurt. Strength, she knew, was not loud resistance. It was staying rooted. There were nights she spoke to the ceiling, not asking for miracles, only for endurance. "Let me last," her silence said. "Let me not become cruel." And morning after morning, she rose with tired eyes and an undefeated heart. She carried her disappointments the way others carry secrets, carefully, so no one would feel burdened by them. Her pain never demanded attention. It simply lived inside her, teaching her empathy before the world ever taught her fairness. She was never chosen by luck, never favored by circumstance. Yet she made space for joy where there should have been none. A shared meal, a small laugh, a moment of peace. She treated each one like a rare gift and never asked for more. Her voice was soft, but her presence was grounding. When she entered a room, conflict lost its sharpness, not because she argued, but because she reminded everyone that love can exist without winning. She aged with grace not because life was easy, but because she refused to let hardship rewrite her character. Wrinkles became her history. lines of survival, maps of everything she endured, and still forgave. She owned nothing the world could measure, yet she owned my sense of right and wrong, because through her, I learned that true wealth is not what you collect, it is what you protect inside yourself. She walked through life without armor, yet nothing truly defeated her. Every loss tried to claim a piece of her, but she learned how to grieve without surrendering her soul. Pain knocked often at her door, and still she answered with dignity. She knew the weight of waiting, waiting for relief, waiting for recognition, waiting for a kindness that sometimes never arrived. But she never let waiting turn into bitterness. Patience for her was not weakness. It was a quiet form of courage. Her sacrifices were never announced. No one applauded the moments she went without, so others could have enough. She erased herself gently, not because she felt unworthy, but because love, to her, meant choosing someone else first. Time tried to teach her fear, but she learned faith instead. Not the kind that demands answers, but the kind that keeps moving. Even when the path is unclear, she trusted that goodness does not need witnesses to remain good. She was misunderstood more times than she was appreciated. Her silence was mistaken for consent, her kindness for permission. Still, she never hardened. She corrected the world by staying soft in places that tried to bruise her. Her eyes carried exhaustion, yet they never lost their honesty. You could see every year in them, not as regret, but as experience. They didn't beg for sympathy. They reflected wisdom, earned the difficult way. She built a home out of intention, not possessions. Peace lived where luxury never did, and even in scarcity, she created abundance of care, of understanding, of emotional shelter. She taught me that survival does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm still here," after everything tried to erase you. And that whisper, in her voice, was louder than any victory. She owned nothing the world could measure, yet she carried a wealth that never depreciated. No land in her name, no jewels on her hands, but every beat of my heart knew exactly where it belonged. She gave without calculating. Love was never a transaction for her, never a bargain struck in hope of return. She gave because giving was the only language her soul spoke fluently, and in doing so, she taught me what richness truly means. Her life was a collection of quiet victories, waking up after nights that tried to break her spirit, smiling on days that offered no reason to smile, standing tall in rooms that never made space for her. She carried her past like a folded letter, never hidden, never read aloud, but always close to her chest. Pain did not define her. It refined her. Each scar became a lesson, not a limitation. She never asked the world to understand her. She learned early that understanding is rare, but integrity is enough. So she walked forward, unapologetic in her kindness, unashamed of her tenderness. Even in silence, she spoke volumes. Her presence calmed storms she never caused. Her absence revealed how much strength the room had been borrowing from her all along. She was not perfect. She was real, and that authenticity made her irreplaceable. She loved with patience, forgave with caution, and trusted with wisdom, earned the hard way. If the world had paused long enough to truly see her, it would have learned that greatness does not always announce itself. Sometimes it lives quietly in a woman who owns nothing, yet owns an entire heart without ever asking for it. She never chased the spotlight, yet light followed her naturally. Not the kind that blinds, but the kind that warms. Steady, reassuring, patient enough to wait for cold hearts to soften. Her strength was never loud. It lived in endurance, in choosing to stay gentle. After life tried to make her harsh, she learned how to bend without breaking, how to survive without becoming unrecognizable. To herself, she carried responsibility like a second spine. Others leaned on her without asking how heavy it felt, and she let them, not because she was obligated, but because love, to her, meant being reliable. Even when tired, her hands told stories. Her lips never did. Hands that worked more than they rested. Hands that gave more than they kept. Hands that trembled sometimes, not from weakness, but from years of holding on. She knew disappointment intimately, dreams that arrived late, promises that never returned. Still, she refused to poison her heart with resentment. She chose acceptance, not surrender, but peace with what was, and courage for what remained. She didn't need admiration to know her worth. Her value was not dependent on applause or approval. She measured herself by honesty, by effort, by the quiet knowledge that she had loved fully. In her presence, even silence felt safe. There was no pressure to perform, no demand to pretend, just a calm understanding that being real was more than enough. She owned nothing the world could steal, and that was her power, because what lived inside her, resilience, compassion, truth, belonged to no one else. And in knowing her, I learned that some people are not possessions. They are blessings, meant to be recognized, not owned. She moved through years, like a quiet river, never rushing, never stopping, carving her strength into time itself. Every hardship tried to redirect her, yet she kept flowing toward love. She learned early that the world does not pause for tired souls. So she rested in faith, in small hopes, in the belief that sincerity still matters, even when unnoticed. Her endurance was an act of belief, not obligation. She carried loneliness without letting it harden her. Some nights were long, filled with unanswered questions, yet she never allowed despair to take root. She chose dignity over complaint, silence over bitterness. Her voice was gentle, but her decisions were firm. When she gave completely. When she stayed loyally. And when she let go, she did so without regret, knowing she had already given her best. She never begged life to be fair. She only asked herself to remain true. And that truth, unpolished, unadvertised, became her identity. She stood whole, even when life offered fragments. Her presence healed, without promise. People felt safer near her, without knowing why. She did not solve problems. She softened them. She did not erase pain. She made it bearable. She lived without excess. Yet nothing essential was missing. Love filled the spaces where wealth never arrived. Respect replaced luxury. Contentment stood guard where fear tried to enter. She owned nothing that time could take away. And that is why she remains eternal in my heart, not as a memory, but as a standard of what it means to live with grace when the world gives you very little in return. She owned nothing the world could claim, yet she owned everything that mattered to me. Every beat of my heart, every quiet thought, every memory of love. was hers entirely. Her hands were empty, yet they held the warmth that healed countless hearts. Her eyes were tired, yet they shone with understanding that the world could never teach. She endured storms that would have broken mountains, yet she stood unshaken, not for glory, not for recognition, but because love demanded it. Every tear she shed was not wasted. Every sleepless night was an investment in someone else's happiness. She never counted what she gave, never demanded what she deserved. Yet the world would never measure her true wealth. Her soul, though weathered and tested, remained pure. Her life, though quiet and uncelebrated, was a monument to resilience, kindness, and love. She taught me that strength is silent, that patience is a treasure, and that love, real love, does not ask to be noticed. It only asks to be given. She was poor in possessions, yet richer than any kingdom. She had nothing the world coveted, yet she possessed all that matters. Because in loving her, I realized the truest wealth: heartfelt devotion, enduring courage, and a love that cannot fade. She owned nothing, yet she was my everything. And now I carry her lesson in every breath, in every choice, in every heartbeat. Love is not bought. Love is lived. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and honor the unseen strength of the women who shape our lives.